I built Allegiant Stadium, the home of the Las Vegas Raiders, in Minecraft for this year's Super Bowl 58. This is the second year in a row I've made a Super Bowl arena, doing State Farm Stadium last year. This was recreated as part of the incredible Build the Earth project, a name which means exactly what it implies, and I will explain more about it later on in the video. For now, make sure to subscribe to see next year's stadium, as I plan to continue this trend annually, as well as more real-life buildings recreated in Minecraft on my channel. This project was massive, clocking in at over 100 hours of replay mod footage alone. If you include man hours from everyone who participated, it would probably be at least 200 hours. Let's just say there's a reason I only build one stadium a year. Let's begin. As all builds must start out, I began this insane structure by beginning to outline it. I worked with Quasar, a Nevada builder and fellow lead admin of BTE's South and West US, throughout the entire process of making this stadium. I first outlined part of the base walls, while he worked on the center section of the roof to make clean lines that were all parallel. While he kept working on that, I outlined the entire outer section of the roof, matching the height exactly as it curves by a few meters throughout the building. After this, I stacked up the lowest walls to the same height and worked on some of the indented sections as Quasar began to terraform the sidewalk around it. LiDAR data, acquired through laser imagery, is a tool often used in BTE which would have helped us here, as on our main Western US server we actually imported better terrain data for Las Vegas. But all of the North American servers were being moved onto a database, so they were down for most of the time while we built Allegiant, and as such we had to terraform manually on a temporary server. From here, I began the extremely painful process of making the walls. The entire stadium has a massive slope, so I began by placing a whole layer of a different placeholder block to distinguish it from the base walls. From there, I began to create lines going up, using identifying points on the wall to determine the exact height on Google Earth as I went up. We use Google Maps and Google Earth to recreate buildings on BTE, but unfortunately the data can be bad sometimes, and that was certainly the case here. It was difficult to tell where certain sections of the wall actually were, and this required some fixing down the line. The stadium has a lot of outward extensions, so working around those made it more difficult than if it didn't have any. As for making the slope itself, this was my most major build in which I had to curve the walls, as State Farm had a few smaller sections but they weren't exact curves. There was a specific method I used for these, created by a builder named Punterje, in which I made lines between the outermost blocks on the X and Z axis and then filled in between. I ended up using cyan wool to separate the outward extensions, building them a block out from the wall itself. After I did these sections, I tried to connect some of the wall with the roof, as well as adding that particular extension at the top. I would end up reworking this later on, as for some of the roof I assumed it went a couple blocks straight down, when that was not always the case. I painstakingly tried to continue it while outlining the cyan areas, but this was very frustrating due to the bad 3D. While I tried to figure that out, Quasar started outlining and terraforming some of the other surrounding areas, beginning with the practice field and continuing onto some of the sidewalks and one of the parking lots. I then decided to just make outlines from the bottom to the top and do the extensions once we were able to figure out the 3D issue and determine a standard height. I did have some errors along the way that I had to fix, but it was just part of the process. As I build up these walls, let me tell you about Build the Earth. We are a global project looking to recreate the entire planet on a 1:1 scale in Minecraft, with one block equaling 1 meter in real life. We are very far from our goal, and we're looking for as much help as possible. We use a tool called TPLL, which converts real-life coordinates into in-game ones, with us using an edited form of the Dymaxion map projection. World Edit is also an extremely handy tool for us, allowing for mass commands such as //line, //fill, and //replace. While we don't have much Bedrock support at the time of filming this, any Java player is allowed to join, and you should absolutely consider it. BTE building is very different from normal creative building, and most teams have trial areas where you are able to learn the process for yourself. So become a builder today. Links are in the description, and if you have any questions about the process, you can leave a comment or feel free to DM me on my Discord, as I very frequently use it. In fact, every BTE team has their own Discord, and there's also a main hub server. It's amazing to build places that you know personally, and it's one of my favorite aspects about the project. Alright, looks like the walls are about done. Let's keep going. Next up was starting the process of the roof. Before it actually begins to slope up, there are flat and indented sections all around that I needed to add. The odd shape made it much more difficult to outline than typical builds, as it required a lot more TPLLs as a result. At the same time, Quasar began planning for the front section, which indents but is not reflected on the 3D, so this would require some more precise mapping and calculating. From there, I began to fill in the roof. I started this by making a series of lines to the center, as well as fixing the elevation there as I went along so that the slopes would be accurate. After that, I used //line to connect all of the blocks that were at the exact same height, and then used //fill to work my way up the slope and completely outline the outer section, with the inner oval not coming until quite a bit later. Then I contributed to the front indent, helping Quasar plan out how we would make it. Also, at this point, a key person would join us in building the stadium. Reese, who would end up being extraordinarily helpful to the whole building process. He began work on outlining the surroundings up to the immediate road, and then I started the logo, an insanely tedious process, yet ultimately very rewarding. I mean, this took me well over 5 hours to do, but the end result looks absolutely incredible. The specific Allegiant logo with the orange and yellow striations was a little bit more difficult because of the scale, but I think it still ended up looking pretty good. This is also when I went back and fixed the slope of the wall all the way around. Unfortunately, the angles of the logos were different, or I would have simply copied one and pasted it to the other side. After that was done, I finally started tackling the outside sections of the wall. I began with the very top of it, calculating it as 8 blocks for the thick sections all the way around and 3 for the thinner ones. I did not cover the entire top, as I would wait to do the other sections which slope up there. Then I was able to help Quasar with the front indent, fixing the height and then doing some of the outer sections which were right below it, as well as filling in the ceiling. He then started on the middle of the roof while I continued to work on the exterior, starting to fix some of the original sections which received a worse treatment from the 3D. I started on the bottom and began to wrap my way all around the stadium after fixing the original section. There were a few slopes for this part, but they did help me with the process. After I did the lowest segments, I began to start going back around, meticulously doing all of the slopes one by one. There was a great deal of TPLLing and height checking involved, though again the 3D made some of the exact parts difficult to discern, so I did my best to calculate some of the angles and heights. Also, sorry about the render distance and jumping around on some of these clips. Replay mod isn't always the best when it comes to chunk loading. And as for the jumping around, I got a few clips from Quasar, so I couldn't always make it very seamless. After finally completing all of the exterior sections, I helped Quasar on the roof. He did the same thing I had done with the lower section by making a lattice, and I helped him fill it in. Additionally, we did some more work on the indent, with him adding the first section of window detailing, and then once the roof was entirely filled, he started to detail the ground. And I did some of the stairs out front, though he definitely improved my design. Meanwhile, Reese was working on some major terraforming all the way around, and I have to give him thanks because he put in an insane amount of work. He also added outlines for the booths and security areas. From here, Quasar continued to do the texturing on the ground, including the Raiders logo, while I did a bit of detailing on the exterior sections, adding a white line which is on the bottom of all of these segments. Then I did the rest of the window detailing for the indented section of the wall. After this, Quasar did more front surroundings, making the ticket booth and starting on the sidewalk texturing, which by the way he did a phenomenal job at. He also started adding some trees and plants. Then I added the black line behind the white sections of the exterior walls all the way around and started to detail the indent. This was not too hard because it goes perfectly straight up and not in a curve. However, the real challenge then began, figuring out how to detail the windows which went up in a curve. We ultimately decided to start with the horizontal detailing, using black carpets for the black lines. The difficult part was choosing what to do for the vertical lines. Normally we would use things like fences or doors, as you can see with the indented section of the wall, but with such steep curves that would just not work here. So we ended up doing a pattern of gray and black stained glass, which would make the lines between them more visible. It took a while for me to understand the pattern, but it was a lot easier to distinguish it once I started using placeholder blocks, going with red and orange wool. I began to create the pattern going all the way around the stadium, though it is admittedly a little hard to see through the replay mod footage. Basically, we had the carpets at the very front so it would be more visible as window detailing, and as a result we needed to push back the walls, so that's what I was starting to do. The only blocks which wouldn't be moved back by one were at the very bottom of the windows, and I would have to fix those a bit later on. Meanwhile, Quasar was working on one of the parking lots at the front after continuing to texture, and while he did that, I cleared out the front section of wall to prepare to fully outline the windows. Occasionally I had gotten some of the patterns wrong, but that was fairly easy to fix with some / replace commands. This tedious process took me about 4 hours to do, then I ultimately got to start replacing the placeholder blocks with the glass. After this, I continued to do the pattern for some of the lower sections which I had missed, and then Quasar helped me design some of the other aspects of the large sections of wall. For some of it, there was a black section just above the windows themselves, so we used black concrete to differentiate it from the exterior sections which we would use a pattern for shortly. There are also vertical lines, so we used a mix of banners and buttons to replicate those. Then I did one of the more complex sections which includes white lines repeatedly next to each other. We chose to use half iron doors for these as they would just look better than things like end rods due to the thickness and the angle. This part took well over an hour to do. Quasar began to work on some of the glass doors at the bottom walls while I did this. After this, I was just starting to fix some of the windows, completing them, and for one of them adding a few white lines which are there in real life. Then I continued to make the rest of the black concrete sections while Quasar did a pattern for one section of wall which has no windows at all. Then I made the logo which is on the side of the stadium. I tried to copy this over to the other side where it appears again, but the angle was not exactly correct, so I just used it as a guide while I manually added it. From here, I replaced the rest of the orange and red placeholder blocks in the bottom windows with glass, completely replaced the outer ring of the roof with its accurate color, started to plan out how to detail the giant screen by doing a border of black glass, and we finally began texturing the exterior sections. We used an interlocking pattern of black wool and concrete powder, but I started this by simply outlining the entire exterior and it took me several hours to do, as in some places the pattern had to be modified due to the thickness of the wall or the angle. But finally, after all of these were patterned, I replaced all air blocks underneath one of the placeholder blocks with barriers so that powder blocks would not fall, and then replaced them. Then I got to work adding some of the roof lines to give it a bit more texture and accuracy using gray concrete powder to differentiate from the cyan terracotta. Quasar also was trying to make some of the lines which go across the center section of the roof, and I helped him with that by taking his standard line and starting a way to easily copy and paste it. However, before continuing that, I decided to finish up the rest of the roof details. This was mainly the very outer section, in which I added a series of ladders and dividers all the way around, as well as some small posts. Additionally, I switched out the placeholder blocks so that the color would be correct on the sides and floor of the indented part, and I put black carpet on the edge. Then I put a series of thin lines around the logos using buttons and put some tall poles around the middle. Finally, I returned to the center roof, pasting the same line across the whole way and using concrete powder to make it fall down. And then I used a replace command to make everything underneath that the right block. The last aspect of the roof overall was a little extra texturing to give it a more reflective look, again done with some gravity block magic. From there it was time to work some more on the walls. I did the smaller Allegiant logo, helped texture some of the lower wall, and then started filling in all of the windows. Normally I would either block them all manually or use the //fill command, but that was not really an option here, and the bottom wall was not fully done, so I did not want the interior to be filled. So what I did was a more limited fill command for certain areas. This way I was also able to have the backing of the giant screen be different, as Quasar eventually does want to add something here, but we did not have time to come up with a design. Normally there are things here on the screen like concert tour advertisements and game announcements. After filling, I just cleaned up some of the extra blocks while Quasar was doing some more wall texturing. While I did that, and some of the time while I was offline, some major texturing and detailing was done by Reese, as well as Uwanium, a staff member who I've worked with before who decided to help out a bit on this project. This was primarily around the practice field, which I began work on next, switching between that and detailing the lower walls. This was a very difficult aspect of the build. While there is a field here in real life, the outlines are very faded and hard to see, and it took me some time to ensure that the rectangular sections were parallel. Additionally, I would be doing the Super Bowl 58 field, so I used the Gridiron Fields database, like I did for State Farm Stadium. Unfortunately, they did not upload the picture of the field until I had already started it, but it was very helpful to have either way. Meanwhile, Quasar, Uwanium, and Reese continue to detail and texture the surrounding area, including adding trees, lampposts, and one of the security entrances. The logos and the names on the field were the most difficult part to do, especially the 49ers text due to the color and angle, so Quasar helped me improve it. The Chiefs side was admittedly a good bit easier, but still difficult as I was doing it all by hand trying to match the angle of the field. Then, I started to work towards finalizing the walls. I added most of the final wall sections, which were basically all glass doors, so it was just a process of repeating the pattern quite a few times. Then I did the giant sign and screen out front, again just using glass in the backing for now, though Quasar may design it down the line. Then the last section of the wall was completed after I made the last stairs out front, and I finally filled in the rest of the windows, leaving the stadium completely finished. All that was left now was some detailing, including plants, ground texturing, a billboard, and some more structures around the practice field. At this point, everything was now complete. Check out the final results. Thank you so much for watching. This has taken pretty much an entire month, and I think it is even better than my last stadium. Speaking of, if you would like to see the video where I did my first Super Bowl stadium, check that out here. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more Build the Earth content.